I want to start with everyone's favorite land use review process, which in New York City is called ULURP, the Uniform Land Use Review Process. It is the rezoning process that developers have to go through to build pretty much any substantial project, and certainly anyone that is not as of right in New York City. And you are two of the leading experts in helping clients get through that process. So I'm wondering if you could offer some perspective on how difficult that is today compared to how it has been in years past, because you've been doing this for a long time. Why don't we start with you, Suri?
So thank you so much for that question. The really exciting big city-state public-private projects tend to have to go through ULURP. But those are the projects that offer the most benefits to New York City and to local communities. And I think that one thing that's happened in recent years is that people are so afraid of gentrification, so that even if you bring so much to a community, there'll always be people who will be against your project. Maybe it's blocking windows, maybe they think their rents are gonna go up. So I think it's always been challenging, and I think the way to address those challenges are really to engage stakeholders that wanna see change, that want to see some of the positive results that are going to come out of the process.
Okay, I'm going to ask you who those stakeholders are, because I don't seem to run into many folks who want to see that kind of change anymore. Ken, you and I go back a long way. You remember the days when we were begging people to do developments, and now we are fighting them.
Well, I think that's part of the problem is, we've got a couple of problems. One is that the city agencies are short-staffed, devastated by COVID. There's a backlog of stuff that was derailed during the de Blasio years. That'll get worked out. But the other problem we have is that a lot of the folks who are in the decision-making don't remember what it was like when the city had hard times, right? So it's not, get those crazy kids off my lawn. It used to be better. It used to be worse, but we've had a decade of prosperity, and they kind of take it for granted that things will fall into place. But I have to differ with you, and I'll give you a very good example, Eric, something I spent a lot of time on, and that was the Gowanus rezoning, right? So major rezoning, spearheaded by then City Councilman Brad Lander, a self-proclaimed socialist, but who actually knew how to leverage public-private. The developers worked closely with them. We worked closely with city planning. The community board supported it. We made provisions for the artists. We made provisions for open space, affordable housing. It really was a consensus-building process over a long period of time. There was a small group of dissidents. They sued, and we whipped their ass.
Just to get back to stakeholders, We've been engaged in a lot of successful ULURPs over many years, and this past year we had 9 successful ULURPs. But what I really want to talk about is the stakeholder question. Who are those stakeholders? And I think they're different on every project. They may be preservationists, they may be environmentalists who care about the environment, and they feel that there's something the project's bringing that will be helpful to the environmental and sustainability goals of the city. They could be parents who are excited about having a school. They could be members or board members or donors or community members that are part of a not-for-profit organization that's going to get space. So I think it's always important to find stakeholders who believe in your project. And your project won't have stakeholders if your project doesn't bring something positive to New York.
Do you find that your clients have adjusted to this new reality? Because many of them have been in this business for a long time, and when they started, people wanted them to build. And now they don't want them to build, or they want them to build things that do not pencil out because they're 60% affordable or 100% affordable. And you mentioned Brad Lander. Before he approved the Gowanus rezoning, he killed the rezoning that Fortis wanted to do for replacing the Long Island College Hospital site. I don't know, people seem to have forgotten that, but he was going to get new schools, and there was a great deal on the table, and it all fell apart, and Fortis went ahead and built 100% market rate, which is actually what no one wanted to do. So how many of those failures do you see that we don't even hear about?
Look, the politics of that were completely messed up. I know I represented the State University of New York in the closure of Long Island College Hospital. That was the hospital that Bill de Blasio got arrested saying he was never going to get closed, and then gave in to Andrew Cuomo when Cuomo told him, stop it, enough, we'll figure it out. The upshot of which, by the way, is NYU just opened their promised new ambulatory center and emergency center 10 years after the fact. But here's the thing, and this is an important thing for people to understand. A lot of the elected officials don't understand real estate economics. A lot of them don't want to believe them when you give them the numbers, and the rest of them don't mind if you fail because they think the government should do it anyway. In the case of the Fortis rezoning, the fundamental mistake that the politicians and the community made was assuming that Fortis didn't have a choice. But Fortis couldn't have gotten his acquisition loan to buy it unless it penciled out as an as-of-right project. So they gave up the upside on the assumption that they had him, over a barrel. But in reality, it was the scene from Blazing Saddles. One more step and the sheriff dies, and they shot themselves in the head and didn't get anything out of it.
Do you think that the politicians understand that no one will finance the projects that the politicians dream up, and that you cannot build a project without a loan?
Look, I think that there's a lot of work that has to be done to educate elected officials. I know that we have literally sat down with council members and with other elected officials and gone through the numbers of a project because, and they were shocked. Because there's a perception that somehow there's some boondoggle out there, and you do a project and you're making a fortune, and they just keep asking for things, and at the end of the day, you say, listen, there's going to be nothing, it's not even financially feasible what you're asking for. So we have actually sat down with council members and said, we're opening the books. We want to let you know what things cost. So if you want a community center, here's the dollar value of that. If you want 30% affordable housing, here's the dollar value. You want 50%? Who's going to pay? Can you get government to come up with the money that's required to do these 100% affordable projects? And then I think elected officials start looking at it a little differently. So I think there is an education process that every elected official goes through when they have a project in their district.
Now, are there some electeds that do not learn that? Because I know your own husband went through this in Harlem, trying to do a 900-unit development, which the administration was very supportive of. But the local council member was not, and she would not budge. So I'm wondering if there are just some victories that are impossible to attain.
Look, a lot of things are also timing. And I believe that project will get done. And I think that if it wasn't the first ULURP for both the speaker and the mayor in a very difficult political climate in terms of the local council member, it could have gotten done. A lot of it was just the timing of it, where there wasn't a lot of experience, both on the council side, land use, and also on the administration side, to have the political courage to get it over the finish line. I think this speaker has been incredible at figuring out how to bring her members to the table.
Do you think the failure of that initial application in Harlem had anything to do with the success of some subsequent applications?
100%.
Namely, Bruckner Boulevard in the Bronx and a much larger Larry Silverstein
100%.
a billion-dollar project in Queens and Astoria.
It also changed the dialogue because it changed it from gentrification to we desperately need affordable housing. And that was very, very deliberately strategic to create that dynamic. So I do think that it 100% opened the door for the other projects, and nobody could afford another failure.
Yeah, one of the things that we're up against is the people the politicians know who's against the project, they don't know who's for it. Because the people who are going to benefit from it, they don't even know that they're the ones that are going to benefit. So if you say to somebody, 5 years from now, there's going to be 100 units of housing where the rents are going to be artificially low, there's no waiting list for that. They don't know. But the person who's going to be inconvenienced next door or who just doesn't want new people in their neighborhood, the council member is going to hear from them. And it takes a certain amount of courage, but it also explains why so many of the big rezonings were done in areas that had, low density. They were industrial areas, and the people weren't as well organized, and you could do the bigger rezonings.
The topic of this conversation is politics and real estate. And I think one thing that's really playing into the real estate climate at this moment is the fact that post-census, there are 2-year terms. So that the second these new council members, who are really brand new to the job, got in, they were already worried about getting reelected. There wasn't enough time to have that kind of political courage because they were just afraid that the opposition was going to run somebody against them.
I mean, would you advise clients not to put in for a project in the first 2 years of a new council, wait for them to win how does timing play into that? I'm wondering how many clients where you say, you know what, this is a no-go, don't even try it.
We sit down with a schedule and map it against the political calendar all the time.
Well, that's amazing. And now I'm also wondering about 421A because we hear all the time you can't build rental housing in New York City without 421A because the property taxes on rental properties are too high otherwise for these projects to pencil out. Now, let's assume that 421A doesn't come back and land prices come down to adjust for that. Is rental development still possible because construction costs would still be very high and the political costs would still be very high, and you still have the affordability requirements of mandatory inclusionary housing?
Well, that's only where the city has mapped it or you do a private application. So I think it's going to depend on where and when. First of all, I don't want to bum everybody out, but my prediction is we're not going to see a new 421A program until 2025, maybe 2027. I think there are some workarounds. I'll throw a new idea out to you, which is let the governor and the mayor get together. Let's use the state power. People can deed their property to the state. The state can override the local property taxes, do a pilot, and do an analog of 421A. And it'll work in places like Innovation Queens, Hallett's Point, where they've done the environmental reviews.
And the state is already thinking about that.
But to your question, look, construction costs are a third higher than they are in other places. Nobody wants to talk about them. In a middle-class neighborhood, that's going to be a real problem. In a high-value neighborhood where you can get the rents, it'll be different. But what we're going to see between now and whenever they come to their senses in Albany, you're going to see two things getting built. You're going to see condos, right, that don't get 421A. But people can afford them. The property taxes are not material to the decision. You're going to see affordable housing, except the entire subsidy pipeline is, maxed out. And then there'll be a couple of places, not a lot, but there'll be a couple of places where property owners will wake up to the fact that if they build rental housing without 421A, they're not subject to rent stabilization. And that will be an incentive, but only in places where the rents are high enough that you can make them, and the basis is low enough to make the numbers work.
So, in other words, pure luxury housing still could pencil out without the property tax break, right? But of course,
in a few places, but mostly on the condo side.
Right, that doesn't solve the housing crisis, if you're interested in doing that. I'm wondering if the city made a mistake by passing mandatory inclusionary housing as a permanent law when it depended on 421A, which was a temporary law. So once 421A expired, the property tax break expired, but the affordability requirements did not. So it's sort of like having a nice pair of gloves and then you lose one. You can't really, the other glove is useless. So
we'll find out, Eric, when we see whether anybody builds. After the grandfathered 421 project pipeline runs out, we'll see whether anybody builds in these rezoning areas. And there's a point I want to make about that. I think you alluded to it before. Everybody thinks that if their area rezoned, it's going to be Greenpoint, Williamsburg instantly. You know, thousands of units suddenly dropped in. What they don't realize is the same time that the city did that, they rezoned Mott Haven, but it took 15 years for Mott Haven to start to catch on. Downtown Jamaica in the Speakers District was rezoned almost 20 years ago. Nobody was building there until about now, because so this irrational notion that gets revved up by the NIMBYs, that your neighborhood, you're going to be pushed out of your neighborhood, it just doesn't work that way. But we've done a terrible job of explaining that to the public.
You know, I just want to say something about your question related to mandatory inclusionary housing. I actually think it was very, very problematic because nobody thinks that mandatory inclusionary housing numbers are good enough. So all it did is raise the floor. And now everybody's saying, I'm not interested in 30%, or, you know, I want 50%. I want 100%. There are council members that say, I won't support anything that's not 100% affordable. So what did mandatory inclusionary housing do?
Yeah, I think it did exactly what you said. It created a floor where you could begin negotiating at that 25% affordability and try to get as
But
much.
no council member will accept that floor.
Right.
They won't support a project at that.
Because that means you haven't gained anything as a
Yeah.
council member. But don't you have
Exactly.
to don't you tell your clients you must deliver a political win?
Yes.
Of course.
So what kind of wins do you advise them to provide?
Well, I think there are a lot of other wins besides just raising the affordability. I think you can offer communities things that communities need, and every community is different. There isn't one formula. I think you really need to go into the community to listen really, really carefully, to meet with lots of different stakeholders and figure out how your project can really bring something to the local community, but also to New York City.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
I'd say, first of all, one of the great lies that's foisted on the real estate community is when you say, well, we're going to do affordable. Affordable for who? It's not affordable for the lowest income people. They're the people who need the help the most. And there's some validity to that. But how many of you are involved with multifamily where you have people who get vouchers, right? Section 8, FEPS, right? They can have zero income and you can put them in a really nice apartment because the city is paying it. People don't want to hear that. But I think there's a larger point, Eric, and this is something that Suri knows on a very intuitive level also. When you go in to meet with folks to try and sell them on an application, you're not negotiating, you're being judged. And if they judge you worthy, they'll cut you some slack. And if they think you're a bad guy, you can offer them the Taj Mahal for free, and the answer will still be no. And, you know, we had an
A lot
unfortunate...
of shaking heads here.
Right? We had an unfortunate situation a few years ago, and I'm not going to mention names. People will be able to figure it out, where there happened to be a very prominent New Yorker, very popular guy, bought a very large collection of buildings in Manhattan, and everybody said, well, that's wonderful. We know him. He's on our board. He supported our event. There was another big complex in Brooklyn bought by a former client of both of ours. Nobody knew who he was. He was very private. And if you looked him up, all you could find was his violations, right? So, you know, nobody asked why the guy in Manhattan was paying all that money for rent-stabilized housing, and nobody was asking why the guy in Brooklyn had been able to turn around troubled housing projects before, and what his real intentions were. So that's why I say you've got to demonstrate respect for communities, a willingness to listen, a humbleness, and, you know, most developers are not really good at that.
But I think that's why you find so many real estate developers that are such great corporate citizens. To Ken's point, and I think it's a really important point, the folks that are known in New York and have a reputation because everybody knows them because they've been philanthropic, because they've been engaged in civic life in New York, that goes a very long way in terms of how a local community will judge you.
I'm surprised to hear you say that because, I mean, from the media side, we seem to see developers painted with a broad brush. There's an assumption that all developers are making a killing, that they're only interested in profit. They have no sort of civic engagement at all. I haven't really seen that come into play too much. I have seen some. Oh, let me ask you this question: like, why is it even necessary that we have these individual conversations about this rezoning or that one? Coney Island Avenue in Brooklyn, which is a fairly large avenue, someone proposed an 8-story apartment complex. The neighbors went crazy. The councilman said, no, it's got to be 5 stories. Why is it that you even need political approval to build 8 stories on Coney Island Avenue in Brooklyn, when, by the way, there are other 8 stories buildings several blocks away?
Look, you're asking a very important question, which is the whole process of ULURP needs to be redefined. There shouldn't be a situation where you're so dependent on one person, on one final, that you go through a process for 2 years and you go through the city government, the community board, the borough president, and you could get everybody's support. And the very last person, the council member, has the right to vote you down, and all the members will agree, potentially, right? We've certainly been involved in a project where we did overturn member deference, but certainly under this council member, she wants to bring these council members to the table. But the whole process should be different. Why should one community be so different than building in another community? There is no uniformity to the process, and I would love to see some overhaul of that process so that there's a more uniform approach citywide to these local rezonings.
Well, there's a context to this. Look, the way the charter was constructed was an overreaction to the system that had been before, what was called the Board of Estimate. It was the borough presidents, the citywide elected officials. The mayor didn't really have control, ripe with corruption. They could overrule local people. And when that was blown out in a litigation, the feeling was that we had to empower communities. It was an uprising in our version of the Brooklyn, the New York Spring. Here's a very simple fix. It'll never happen, but it'll completely change the dynamic. And it only requires like 3-line change in the city charter. If something right now, if something is approved by the City Planning Commission, it also has to be affirmatively approved by the City Council, right? So how about if something is approved by the City Planning Commission, which represents the interests of all professionals, backed by professional staff, that the council has to veto it, not approve it? Right? And then let people stand up and say to the communities that are feeling this housing crunch, that are feeling an affordability crisis, no, that wasn't good enough for me. Right now, it's easy for them. There's no consequences to them if they turn something down. I think if you flipped it around, let them justify why they were doing it, I think they would be a little bit more common sense.
So that's sort of opt-in rather than opt-out. I kind of like that idea. I like your idea better because uniformity, although that would cost you guys a lot of money if there were uniformity, because you're paid to navigate through this very complex process that we have.
I just want to add one thing, which is I think we have to create a political benefit, a political will to say yes. I think Ken is right. There's a tremendous political benefit to saying no. What's the political benefit to saying yes?
Yeah, that's a tough one because, as Ken mentioned, voters are the people who are already there. The people who are going to be in those projects don't really exist yet in a political sense.
How do we do that? How do we highlight those developers that are bringing these wonderful, wonderful benefits to New York? There should be a forum so that they get actually some credit.
Well, there's very little publicity about the people who are living in those projects that were already built. You know, those happen and they're completely forgotten about, but meanwhile, there are people living in them, benefiting from the affordability and other components. There's almost no attention paid, and partially that's our fault, because we're covering the next project rather than the last one. I want to ask you a little bit about the state. I know you're both most focused on the city level, but the city is a child of the state, and the entire housing agenda failed this year in Albany. And this wasn't just because of the suburbs, right? City lawmakers at the state level killed this as much as anyone else did, right? And I just rattled off the top of my head 7 significant city policies that were rejected by the state legislature, including, obviously, 421A replacement, 421A construction deadline extension, the FAR cap, which limits how dense residential development can be in Brooklyn, basement apartments did not get done, office conversions, which no one disagrees with, did not get done. So what hope do we have that any of these, some of them low-hanging fruit, can actually get picked?
First of all, I think we have been very successful in changing the conversation in the city with the city legislature. Now I think the same focus needs to be put on the state legislature to educate people, to talk to people, to make sure that they understand how desperately we need some of these to keep projects going. That's number one. Number two, I'm not yet ready to completely give up on a lot of these things. Particularly, I'm hopeful that there'll be some kind of deal post-budget on 421A extension. And then finally, I think I totally agree with Ken. I think the state and the city need to figure out what is within their power to create to keep these projects going.
Yeah, but also, look, best case scenario, Albany is well known as a place where you've got to go back a couple of years, a couple of sessions in a row, that they don't take new ideas right away. Even things that have a lot of equity or momentum behind them take time to get them done. Worst case scenario, the governor bit off more than she could chew. She didn't lay the groundwork. She sprung a lot of this stuff on the legislature without building consensus. You know, we, to some extent, outsource our relationships to the trade associations. They do their best. They can't do it alone. But, you know, two of the things that you mentioned, I think, are good examples of what goes wrong. So one of them, the basement apartments, you know, in theory, that's a good idea, but not unless you live next to somebody that's got an illegal basement apartment. In fact, even the people with some illegal basement apartments didn't want to legalize. And don't forget, there's a lot of single-family homeowners in Carl Hasty's district, you know, two-family houses we don't think about. So I think there was I think people intuitively knew it wasn't a great idea. On the office conversions, that was an example of what Suri was talking about before. Everybody thought that they were going to get a piece of the action. Well, I'm for office conversions. We can't have these empty buildings, but only if we build union, only if it's affordable housing, only if it's this, only if it's that, to the point where, you know, it was never going to be a solution to the housing problem, but I would say that half the property owners that were even thinking about it said, I'm not even going to bother.
And look, I think the bail reform took up all the oxygen in the room, and there was really no ability for anybody to think more broadly.
Well, to your point on office conversions, which most of them don't pencil out as it is, the few that did were killed because someone in the state said, well, yeah, let's do conversions. 40% of the units have to go to homeless people. Okay, that's a great civic notion, but you still can't get a loan to do that, can you?
But we're not seeing the impact of those what are now overvalued office buildings yet. There's a lag in the property taxes, right? You know, we didn't have a lot of defaults. Tenants, you know, my law firm, we weren't there for 2 years. We kept paying the rent. And now it's going to be the air going out of the balloon, but the assessment process is going to lag behind. We're not going to see the impact on the reduction of property taxes for several years, and by the time that happens, then they're going to have forgotten what the fight was about to begin with.
You know, it's funny you say that. I've covered real estate in New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey, and this is the only place where politicians just assume that tax revenue shows up, that they don't actually have to do anything. They always think there's going to be more money. So when a development is proposed, absolutely no one in the political arena thinks about what kind of tax revenue it's going to produce. All they think about is what they can get out of it.
You know, you're bringing up something interesting. I was talking to a client of mine who had a very, very massive project, and he said, I'd like to talk to these elected officials about the tax revenue that I'm going to be bringing to the city. And I said, it's a lose-lose argument. Don't even get involved in that. But you're right. And he was like, why? It's a great argument. I'm like, no, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and it's certainly not the argument for a tax abatement like 421A. where the whole point is that you're not going to pay any property taxes for an extended period.
Well, it doesn't work because the budget goes up every year, and it has for a while. So no one who's in office now has ever existed in the environment where they're dealing with budget cuts, and they have to do something.
That's my point before. So raise your hand if you were not in the workforce in 2001, right? 9/11. If you were not in the workforce in New York City, raise your hand, right? So your only knowledge of the bad old days was watching the opening scenes of the reruns of Welcome Back, Kotter, and you saw the graffiti on the subways, right? Your perception of New York was Sex in the City, maybe it was girls, but basically you've only known a resurgent New York. And there's a good reason why people assumed that the taxes were going to get paid, the values were going to go up, because they were. And quite frankly, what that led to that is coming back to haunt us now. So in the 90s, Eric, you remember this, you couldn't give apartment buildings away. In fact, the city was the largest landlord, 100,000 units taken for taxes. Now the city turns around, thanks to the hard work of a lot of people, including Suri, a little bit from myself, Rudy Giuliani before he lost his mind. The city gets turned around, and now all this money comes sloshing in. Everybody's got their eye on New York. And all of a sudden, multifamily goes from being an investment to being a commodity. And now it's a commodity where the upside is if you can get people out, you can raise the rents. Okay, that's all within the boundaries of the law. But then there were the wise guys that decided that they were going to get the tenants out by construction problems, by turning off the heat, by bringing in thugs. And you know what? They were only a handful, less than the number of people in this room. But they were the ones that became the poster childs for the rest of the industry. So just like everybody assumes that every developer is going to be putting a giant building on their block, no matter what it is, and make a gazillion dollars, every landlord is now perceived to be the worst landlord, even if they're only on the worst landlord list because they bought a bad building just to try and fix it up.
I think the second piece to that is, for years, the real estate community gave so much money to elected officials in Albany that it became sort of a joke that developers had tons of LLCs, and each of the LLCs would max out.
And it was the Republican state Senate that was a brake on everybody else.
And I think that they put a lot of money into keeping the Republicans in office, and the Democrats are very angry about that. And so I think there's some really bad leftover feeling.
That was 5 years ago. Like, you think, I mean, we'd get past that at some point, no? I don't know.
Because the momentum is with
deep.
them, the narrative is with them. And it's not easy to finesse these situations. Fortunately, there are people like Suri and me who are available to help navigate.
Well, I know you alluded to this, but you were right that it seemed like the conversation has changed a little bit in the city because the city council speaker started leaning on some of her members and made it clear to them that if they stood in the way of new housing, she would do something. She would basically rally their colleagues to vote to approve the housing over their objections. But we haven't seen that yet at the state level. I'm wondering what actually caused the conversation to change in New York City? Was it just luck?
No, I think there was I think it was very strategic of a very strategic conversation around the desperate need for affordable housing, what the real data was, what the real numbers were, how much affordable housing is not being built and needs to be built, and that this was really the only way to come to the table and negotiate.
What role did the mayor play in this? Because he did finally come in after a year in office or so and started speaking out on housing more than he was.
But I think Eric, it started to shift. There are many things I can say about the de Blasio administration, but I think one thing that they do deserve credit for was pointing out the issue of income inequality when it came to real estate development. That a lot of the opposition comes from Manhattan elites, that are not dealing with the actual crisis. And when you started to have progressives I mentioned Brad Lander as a good example. When you started to have progressives saying, wait a second, we need income integration in this neighborhood, and it's only going to happen through rezonings and incentives. It worked in Soho, right? It worked in Gowanus. These were big rezonings. Now, the problem we have with the mayor is in the right place in terms of a lot of what he's saying, and a lot of what he's doing behind the scenes is great. But here's the thing, and I really regret that Dan couldn't be here for personal reasons, but there are only 2 citywide rezonings. There are some text amendments. City of Yes, carbon, economic development, housing, it's all great. It's not going to make any difference. I'm for all of it. But there are only 2 citywide rezonings that are being done by city planning now. One of them is Parkchester, Mount Morris, around the Metro North stations, and the other one is out in East New York, something that Erik has been championing since he was the Brooklyn Borough president. But you can't do it with small projects. 80% of the housing that gets built in New York is done as of right, if not more. So you've got to create the density. That can be done on a large level. And if you do a big enough area, you're not dependent on any one council member to do it. So I'm hoping that they will get rid of this backlog, get the staff they need. But now we start to need some vision. And by the way, we can have confidence that somebody like Dan Garodnick can lead that charge, because I don't know how many of you know this, but Bloomberg administration tried to rezone Midtown East, right? They failed, right? They didn't engage with the community. They didn't build stakeholder support, right? De Blasio comes in, now it's East Midtown, and the 2 people most responsible for getting that approved were Gail Brewer, the then borough president, and the council member from the area, Dan Garodnick, who spent several years of his life devoted to building consensus. So he knows the transformational power of rezoning. He just needs to be given the runway to be able to do it, and encouragement that will have his back if he tries to.
That's a good point. Well, I will say about Midtown East, that was an office district. The political red flags of rezoning office are very small compared to residential rezoning. The Gowanus and Soho rezonings that got done, and I said from the beginning these would be approved because you were taking white, wealthy areas and you were integrating them.
Right.
The city council is in favor of that. What it is very difficult to do is to integrate minority neighborhoods with quote-unquote gentrifiers. So this is a problem in terms of housing supply for the city, because most of our neighborhoods are not white, wealthy neighborhoods.
Yeah, and it's also because, look, sometimes things happen over a period of time. You don't realize that they're happening, right? So you take a neighborhood like Crown Heights, right? It's gentrifying. My daughter has moved to Eastern Parkway. Crown Heights is the neighborhood my family left 65 years ago, right? All of her friends are out there. Bed-Stuy has become a hotbed for kids. They get out of Oberlin, they go live in Bed-Stuy until they can afford to go to Crown Heights. That's happening because there is no place else for them to go. One of the things that held off gentrification on the edge of the brownstone belt was the 10, 15,000 units in downtown Brooklyn that got built. They weren't really opposed. They siphoned off a whole generation of those young people. But what the elected officials don't realize is their neighborhoods are gentrifying whether they like it or not. Lori Cumbo, who's now the Commissioner of Cultural Affairs, she got that. She was willing to take a lot of heat to do the Armory project and some other things, Pacific Street rezonings. But that's because she could see that if she didn't do something, the neighborhood was going to change anyway.
Go ahead.
No,
Sir.
I was just going to say what was interesting about the blood center is that it was actually because we really engaged the sickle cell anemia organizations who we met through Adrian Adams, who really mobilized the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus and said, this is really important to our community. Are you going to tell us that white people, rich white people on the Upper East Side are worried about their shadows? And you're not going to build a center that's going to really do amazing research in solving the sickle cell anemia problem? That's not happening. And I would have thought that Ben Kalos would have come to the table, and he wasn't willing to because he was concerned about his own political career. He was looking at that time to run for assembly.
Well, that's one of the contradictions of all this, because you can win by losing if you're an elected official. You can win by blocking something, by preventing something from
But
happening.
the good news is the council voted to support it and
Right,
override
because the
it.
dynamics were right in that case, and in many other cases, they don't work out quite as well. But that was only the second time in 15 years that member deference had
And I
been
had done the
overridden.
one before that when we overruled David Yaskey on the
You had the one, right, when,
So we each had one.
60 Water Street. I was rooting for Suri on that one.
in Dumbo. Let me ask you one more question, because it's 3:49, we got to wrap up. We've talked a lot about what your message to politicians. I'm wondering what your message is to the real estate community, to the clients you deal with. What can they do differently? What are they missing right now that is preventing them from getting over the hump?
Look, I think that the real estate community needs to do a lot of listening when they go into a neighborhood. I think that they really need to understand that you can't just go in with a project and shove it down people's throats. You really need to come up with a project that really works in the local community, and that what you hear, you actually can incorporate in a project. And then finally, I would just say, don't give up. Don't give up on New York, because we desperately need housing. And we desperately need the community of developers to stay engaged in New York. It's part of economic development. It's part of jobs, creation of construction jobs. It's really important, and we just we've got to fight our way through this in a very smart and strategic way.
There are three assumptions that many of you will have, and I beg you to put them aside. The first is it won't make a difference. It will. The second is somebody else is going to do it. They won't. And the third is they're all corrupt anyway, so why bother? And they're not, okay? But let me ask you, how many of you personally know an elected official? Right? You've did business with them, your kids went to school with them, they went to a fundraiser, right? How many of you were adversely affected either by the changes to the rent laws in 2009 or the expiration of 421A? Anybody hurt by that, right? How many of you picked up the phone and called your local legislator? How many of you asked your employees to call their local legislatures, right? You can't just assume that REBNY, the RSA, are going to do it for you. So when you get those newsletters and it say, it's the time, we need to let them know there's another side of the story, I'm telling you, do it. It will make a difference. It will make a difference, but nobody's going to do it for you.
And look, I would say finally, I think it's really important that the Real Deal put together some roundtables with some of the key legislators in Albany and some developers, and have a real closed-door conversation about what is really needed in this city and what's going on and what are their thoughts about the future of housing.
I like that, except for the
And
closed
I'll
door
moderate
part.
it.
I don't like the closed door idea. I'd rather have it on the record.
Well, no.
We
The
could live
real
stream
Deal could organize them and then maybe charge for them.
I'm going to put Liz Kruger on a live stream and say, why did you stand up at a press conference and oppose residential density lifting that cap?
I'm not sure that'll get us
You
the
don't-
goal
you don't
that we
think that
want.
would help? That might not help. It would get a lot of hits, I think, a lot of page views.
You may get a lot of hits.
But, I mean, she deserved some attention for that, and she wasn't the only one. There were a whole slew of Manhattan.
Well, maybe you don't invite her to the round table, but I think there are reasonable folks that we need to sit with and have a real honest conversation.
And also, Eric, look, there was a reason that I said 2025 or 2027 for 421A. That wasn't some artificial calendar. Next year is an election year for the state legislature. It's also a presidential year, higher turnout. People get more excited about it. 2025, 2027 are off years for Albany. Governor runs, I think, will run in between. it really requires people to sit and quietly talk about it outside of the election cycle. Now, you could say, well, what about this year? The legislature wasn't running. Yes, but you had a brand new governor who was untested, right? You had a brand new mayor who was untested. They didn't know how to use the levers of power. So it's unrealistic to think that the legislature this year could tackle as many things that they want. These things take time, they take perseverance, but so does every real estate project that anybody has ever worked on.
Right, and I think we can finish on that note, and I would just observe that it's clear that writing checks to politicians doesn't really work the way it used to, and it is certainly not sufficient.
A lot of them won't even take the money.
Exactly. Won't take the money anyway. So instead, they write checks to political action committees anonymously, and they run lots of ads. And that maybe moves the margins a little bit, but again, it's not the same thing as community engagement, which is what you were talking about. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. Do we have time for one question? One question in the front? Quick question. Yes.
Yeah, hi. I'm in the first row many ways. I have...
It's got to be a question, not a speech, so question.
Can I elaborate a little bit, or just a question? The question is very simple. Why are you here alone? Why don't we see the New York City officials?
His father took ill.
No. But before that, I already asked the question. I just wanted to say to show the legitimacy of this question. I am the guy with 402-1A buildings in Bushwick being built as we speak, and I am going through a nightmare there. I also own a geothermal installation and design firm, the one that gives you free energy, you know, like you don't have to pay neither for heating nor for cooling nor for hot water.
There may be a story there. You should give me
Let me ask you a question. Do you belong to the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce?
Come again?
Do you belong to the Brooklyn Chamber?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so yesterday, the Deputy Mayor for Operations, who oversees DOB, DEP, DOT, and the Parks Department, did a terrific presentation about all of the things that they're trying to do to improve the process and things. Had you come to that instead of this, or maybe in addition to that, you would have had a chance to talk to the actual decision makers. So where are the elected, where are the public officials?
That's not actually answering my question.
They're not here, but that doesn't mean that they're hiding.
So I think the answer to your question is the administration is trying.
Let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish. I need one more sentence to say. And I say, the first part of my question was who to address this question to, right? There is no one from the New York City government here to address. And then the question is to you, shouldn't we have a kind of society to sue New York City? To sue them? Okay. Who's for that?
Okay.
Who's for that? Yeah, I see this.
I think we got enough lawsuits going on. But anyway, thank you everyone for coming out today.
Thanks, Eric.
And thank you for our panelists.
Thank you, everybody.